Welcome to Breaking the Narrative, a Stand With Us Canada podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Primorano, and in each episode, we'll dive into the fight against antisemitism and the delegitimization of Israel. From student leaders to community advocates, we'll explore how people are standing up and making a difference. New episodes drop every other Thursday, so let's get into this week's conversation. Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Breaking the Narrative, a Stand With Us Canada podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Primorano, and thrilled to be joined today by our Stand With Us colleague from overseas, the Executive Director of Stand With Us in Israel, Michael Dickson. Michael is a career Israel educator and has become, in many ways, Michael, you've become a pseudo spokesman for the Israeli people. You can find Michael on all social media as Mr. Michael Dickson, helping to elevate the truth, to the forefront of our social media pages. Michael, it's great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Jesse.
So, Michael, as Stand With Us Canada has grown and, we've helped to establish our footprint here, it's been really interesting to watch people learn a little bit more about, what we do and start to understand the bigger picture about us as an organization. But I think, people who see the work we're doing on campuses and in high schools, they don't necessarily know about our office in Israel and can't imagine, well, if your job is to educate about Israel, what are you doing in Israel? So would love it if you could take a couple of minutes to tell our viewers a bit about your role and what the office over there is accomplishing.
Absolutely. So about 20 years ago, I stepped on a plane and made Aliyah from the UK to Israel, and that's when we opened up our Israel office. And the idea of having an Israel office is multifold. One is that we want to work with populations in Israel that are visiting, so tourists, birthright groups, gap year programs, so that when they get back home, they haven't just had a great time in Israel, but they're able to take that experience and use it in their activism for the Jewish state, and that they leave with those tools. Secondly, we work with Israelis themselves. I always say the most important letter I in the word Israel isn't the one at the beginning, but it's the one you place at the end that turns Israel into Israeli. And it's, the most pure way of hearing about what life is like in Israel is from Israelis themselves. Their true experiences and how they see the country is really important. But as we know, Israel has not invested so much in public diplomacy, and so we start in the high school and work through campus where we teach Israelis how to advocate for their own country, how the world perceives them, and how to deal with different audiences, kind of understanding the different nuances of that they might otherwise not know. And then thirdly, we have a visitor center that is open here for families, for tourists, and for groups, right in the heart of King David Street. About 10,000 people come through our doors every year, where they engage in a really high-tech, modern environment and get to learn the skills that we teach about activism for Israel, and they improve their knowledge about Israel, and a lot of other aspects are based out of here as well. So for instance, our social media operation, which as you know, Jesse, is huge, is located out of Israel, and that's very purposeful because it means that we're ahead of the news curve. When the rest of the world wakes up, we're able to get people the truth right from here on the ground.
Absolutely. And you're able to establish resources, like you said, from right there on the ground, right? All the great educational material that we're creating, the stories that we're telling, we're not trying to do it from overseas. We're getting it right from the source, which I think is really important and helps to paint a really true and accurate narrative. And I love telling people about what the Israel office is doing because it feels like a really holistic approach to Israel education, right? Trying to touch on everything from all angles. And so I'm curious, Stand With Us is doing so much around the globe. How do you, as sort of somebody, right there at, overseeing it all and participating in it all, how would you describe our impact, what we're trying to accomplish, more than just empowering the next generation or fighting back online? How would you describe what we're trying to do?
Well, I mentioned to you that I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and our impact has only grown during that time. But our mission has stayed the same. And our mission is education about Israel. Our core mission is fighting anti-Semitism and supporting Israel around the world. And that has never changed. Maybe the methodologies have, they certainly have. But that core mission has never changed. Through the course of my career, I've had people who want to focus on one thing or the other. So for instance, I hear a lot of organizations and people often said, well, you need to just concentrate on the positives about Israel, just the positives beyond the conflict, all of that kind of stuff, not the other stuff, concentrate on that positive message. And then on the flip side, other people said, well, no, if you're dealing with anti-Semitism, you need to take Israel out of the equation. And I think that we've seen, particularly in this post-October the 7th world, that doesn't work. Both things have merit. You need to do both of those things, but we say you need to do both those things together. You can fight anti-Semitism, you can call out BDS and the anti-Semitic campaign, and at the same time, you can put, you don't get defined by the bad guys, but instead you're able to define your own narrative and show the real picture of what's going on here in Israel. And so we try and train particularly young people to be able to do both, to identify what anti-Semitism is, to know how to call it out, to know how to act against it, to fight that fight, and at the same time, to be proud in their Jewishness if they're Jewish, or to be proud of Israel and Zionism if they're not, and to understand Israel's core story so they can articulate it to others and really win over hearts and minds.
And that's two of the huge reasons why I'm so proud about, to work for, with Stand With Us, around the globe, to be leading Stand With Us here in Canada is, those two things that you just mentioned. The first is that, we're really focusing on empowerment and putting the right tools into the hands of the next generation. But the second is that we're evolving to deal with modern trends, to deal with modern anti-Semitism without losing what made us who we were in the first place, right? Is that we have this educational piece that we really believe that education is the road to peace. And even in this climate that becomes ever more hostile and, argumentative and has become really a battleground, we don't, sink down to that level, right? We've really maintained this concept that if we continue to educate, to share accurate, factual narratives, that we can turn the tide that way. And that's something I'm really proud of because, unfortunately, it is, has become ever more contentious out there on our campuses. And it's really amazing to see our students always keep that level head. So like you said, Michael, you've been doing this for 20 years. I've been doing it for 3.5, and I already get this, aren't you burnt out? Aren't you tired? And I answer in the same way, that I'm sure you do, that it's the next generation that kind of fuels us, that we see, how inspiring they can be and what we're creating. But similarly, we've been here to observe some of the difficulties of what this new emerging generation means, right? That there's, social media, there's the ability to push narratives in a way like never before. You've had a front row seat to Gen Z and the developments around this age group. What do you see? What concerns you the most? And what are we doing to try to adapt to this new world?
Yeah, those are all the right questions, and there's a lot to unpack there. So, the ally will, as you know, spin around the world before the truth gets its pants on, or whatever the phrase is. But that is more true than ever in this age of social media. And so we've always tried to have a very pioneering and creative atmosphere where we will try new things. And that's one of the reasons why we're so successful on social media. A huge reach, 2.2 billion people reached since October the 7th across multi social media platforms. And that's necessary. It's still a drop in the ocean versus the other guys, right? The bad guys would like to paint this as a David and Goliath battle with us seeming as Goliath. We know the truth that we are David. But of course, we can push back, and that does give us a real opportunity to make a difference. And so we utilize social media to leverage real world activity, whether that's pressuring university administrations to do more about anti-Semitism, or pushing back against anti-Israel boycott campaigns, or teaching people, using social media as a teaching tool to empower young people particularly to know more about what is true about both Judaism and about Israel. And so that's something that we continue to do. And then, I see a lot of people often despondent, and I see a lot of despair, particularly in the time since October the 7th. My view is that despair is not a strategy. And so I understand that there's a lot of pain to go around, both with what happened here in Israel on October the 7th and since, and of course what's happened in the diaspora in Canada and around the world when it comes to anti-Semitism. But that's not going to get us anywhere. So we have to instead be strategic and focus in on what will work. And that's two things. One is shining a light on the problem, shining a light on these false allegations against Israel, shining a light on anti-Semitism, on violence against Jews, calling it out where we see it, Jew hatred, and explaining to the public why this is unacceptable. And then on the other side, pushing forward with the true agenda, not always being on the back foot, not always being responsive, responding to a lie where it needs to be responded to, not overinflating the rhetoric of anti-Semitic campaigns, but pushing forward with a positive agenda for Israel. And there's so much to be positive about. And on that theme, I see young people, rather than kind of having their back against the wall, pushing forward, reaching out to us. I'm sure you do as well, Jesse, reaching out to us in this post-October 7th world, saying, I want to stand up and be counted. I want to make a difference. Now, please help me and teach me and give me the tools to do that. And so actually our problem right now is that we have so much demand. So we have to try and meet that demand, and us and the rest of the Jewish and pro-Israel world needs to meet this moment where people are saying, count me in. Douglas Murray speaks about October the 7th being like when a flare goes up and suddenly you see where everyone is standing. Maybe before it was dark, but now it's light and you see where everyone is. So a lot of people basically capitalized on that moment and said, I see what is going on. Now count me in. So the question for us is, can we meet that demand? Can we reach as many people as possible, whether they're in the high school, whether on the campus, whether in the adult community, whether in the non-Jewish community, reaching out to us and saying, please help. Can we be there for them and give them the support that they need?
And moreover, how does the community do the same thing, right? I think that's, people always ask that question, how do we help? How can I help? Well, there's lots of ways, and that's the thing that's the most beautiful about a community, is that it can come from one angle or somewhere completely different. But I think people have to understand that there is an insurmountable fear when you look at the volume of rhetoric coming from the other side. You mentioned it before, right? That 2.2 billion is somehow still a drop in the ocean. But the only way the Jewish people have survived for 3,000 years of persecution is just to pretend like we are not the David in the situation, to pretend that we can handle this challenge, because we can and we have, but we need everyone to find a role. And I think that's really important. And social media is so interesting, Michael, because we were talking the other day how you can reach more people with one social media post than our student cohorts, do over the course of months in some instances, and this is sort of that modern battlefield that we're playing on. And while it's important, you can't forget about the grassroots. We still have to keep pushing there, and that's something that I'm really proud of us and what we're doing. But let me pivot a little bit, because I think we could spend all day talking about Stand With Us, but I'm really curious to get your take as somebody who is, like I said, on the forefront of this discussion on social media, somebody who's committed their career to Israel education. You've spoken with so many people, you've done interviews and podcasts, and Canada is often an afterthought, as I'm sure you probably would agree. Like, over the last 2 decades you've been doing this, Canada is always sort of, the nice little brother that, is looking to have a peaceful and good time. And we've sort of become an ideological battleground, I think, on this conversation of, really leading the charge. And we're seeing, dangerous policies coming to rise in Canada before other places as it relates to, school boards, university admins. Yeah. And so I'm just curious, to get your take. I guess this is sort of a two-pronged, it's the same question, but it comes from two places. So social media, we see how quickly everyone is to believe the lies and to amplify the rhetoric. And then similarly, here in Canada, we have this inability for people to sort of think critically about Israel and to ask questions, and rather than just to sort of fall in line with what's become a mob here. So my question for you is, as you've watched Canada, as I like to unfortunately say, sort of devolve into this, what do you attribute that to, and what do we need to be doing or thinking about differently to pull ourselves out of this difficult time?
Yeah, so to address the point first about the big lies, we're talking at a time when an organization called Genocide Scholars has come out categorically and saying that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. And in the days since, that's been unpicked with people from within that organization saying, well, actually, they didn't get a chance to vote on this issue. And actually, I went on their website today. Did you know you can join Genocide Scholars for $30? I could join them today with no background in genocide studies or whatever it might be called, and then vote on their motions. So some of these organizations and their pronouncements are really baseless. but they're also duplicitous. And so we have to be able to call that out wherever it is. Of course, you and I know that the media will take that story and run with it, but we have to shine a light on it where we can. When it comes to Canada, it definitely has been a downward spiral, but to some extent it was ever thus. I'm not saying ever, but certainly in 2002, the riots on Concordia University, you can draw a straight line between that to anything that's going on today on McGill or U of T. Like this has been happening for a while. And so we have to be loud in our advocacy for the Jewish community and for Jewish students' rights to study in peace and to live out their full identity. And we have to explain to people what anti-Semitism is. They don't necessarily understand what anti-Semitism itself is, or the fact that you cannot be Jewish without some kind of connection to Israel. It's part of Jewish identity. And so that's why the teaching of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the adopting of it, definition of anti-Semitism is so important, and we've been at the forefront of that, working with not just universities, but with municipalities and with authorities and with sports organizations and cultural organizations, and that's really important, and we've been doing that, as you know, around the world. And Canada definitely has to do more. I mean, unfortunately, we've seen the government turn a blind eye almost to this issue. We don't see the political will on all sides to act against it, but I do think there is a silent majority of people who are fed up of that and understand that anti-Semitism is not just a problem for Jews, and on campus not just a problem for Jewish students. Anti-Semitism at its core rots a society where it takes hold. And so what begins with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews. And the more we can have people understand that they have a skin in the game, this kind of extremism is going to tear a country apart, and it's doing so in so many different ways in countries like Canada and others. So that is part and parcel of what this anti-Israel campaign is, and we have to teach people that so that they will be allied with us and form coalitions against it.
It's the silent majority bit that you talked about is very apt, because you see it all the time on social media. Like, there's fringe voices that sort of speak up and say, hey, look, my Christmas visit with my child should not be interrupted, in the name of Palestine, right? And last week we had, the Pride Parade here in Canada was halted by the pro-Palestinian group. Again, progressive spaces that are at first were seen as a safe haven for this movement, as a place that they could go and be supported. But it seems like it's never enough in many ways. Like, even when you look at media coverage of Israel, it's clearly slanted against Israel. But you read from the anti-Israel crowd that, the media is biased and the government is against them, and it feels like it's never enough, which is sort of lends itself to the argument that or the conversation we were just having about how like you said, what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews, right? So these progressive spaces are good for the pro-Palestinian crowd until they're not, right? And then when they're done with the Jews, then they start to eat up those spaces as well. And for me, Michael, I know, not to get too political or of anything of that nature, but like to see, crowds being led in chants to, destroy Canada, to destroy America, being led by folks with their faces covered, wearing Islamic, terror representation, garb. It's very scary. And I don't know, the society around us is yet to wake up and yet to sort of speak up. And I guess the question we're all trying to figure out is, how do we get them to do that? What do we need them to see to understand the magnitude of this problem? Because it's not just about us.
Absolutely. And I think society is waking up. I think that the leadership isn't always waking up, and they're making very short-term political considerations, or they're trying to distract with this issue. The proportion that Israel gets concentrated on by Western leaders, and so far away from this and unaffected by this conflict, is incredible. And often that's just, a duck and cover and trying to cover up for anything that may be going on in their own country. It's a very good distraction. So at the end of the day, Israel will chart its own course, and the players in this conflict will chart a course to peace if that is their choice. And it certainly hasn't been by Palestinian leadership for a very long time, and it certainly hasn't been for a lot of countries in the Middle East for a while. But as we know, when countries get on with it, they really can, moderate and make peace in this region. speaking to you obviously from Israel. And so the Abraham Accords is shines a light on what could potentially be. And so that's the kind of thing we should be championing. And of course, these campaigns aren't campaigns for peace. They're not talking about coexistence. They're not talking about a better future. They're very much at their core extreme, anti-Israel, and often anti-Western.
Anti-West, anti-democracy, anti-freedom, anti the many things that, sustain our civilization over here. And I think that's the scariest part is, like, for me, I really do see, I don't want to say doomsday, I mean, it's dramatic, but I can see, and I'm sure you can too, where this goes if it continues down this path. And it's not just, it's not just a threat to the Jewish people, like I keep saying, but to see Canada under siege in the way that it is it's very nerve-wracking for us as Canadians. And I'm glad to hear you bring up the Abraham Accords, because I think something that we're finding so fascinating here is to see countries in the Middle East that are acknowledging Israel's existence, its right to defend itself, building peace and security agreements with Israel. Meanwhile, the Canadian government, the British government are acknowledging a Palestinian state, forcing arms embargoes on Israel, and it feels sort of like the West is trying to make an assessment of a neighborhood that they don't live in and is failing to do so, while those who live there really seem to get it. So, you see all these shows, the Pierce Morgans, the, other YouTube stuff where all these sort of self-proclaimed commentators have, been vilifying Israel for almost 2 years. Mm-hmm. If there's one thing that you could say, whether it's historical context, contemporary logic, if there's one thing you feel like they're missing, all of these anti-Israel voices that are propagating this nonsense, what would it be?
Well, there are a couple of things. I mean, I think that what they're advocating is not actually even best for Palestinian people, right? So actually them having a jihadi-led government, or a government compromised by terror or by corruption, is not the best thing for Palestinian people. Them having leadership that teaches hate and invests in the wrong kind of things and the wrong kind of future is just leading us to more trouble. So there has to come a point when we start to think differently, which is, by the way, an example in the Abraham Accords. Think differently about what could be. And unfortunately, they're stuck in very old thinking that has taken us to this place. And the idea that a Palestinian state will be proclaimed basically on the blood of the victims of October the 7th is pretty horrific, and sends all the wrong signals to the extremist players, not just in the region here, but of course around the world. I think that we need to make the very clear case, and teach particularly young people to make the very clear case of why there is a sole Jewish country in the world. 193 countries in the world, only one Jewish country, over 3,000 years old, over 75 years young. Why does it exist? Well, it exists because it is the indigenous ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, and this is where we come from, and this is where the Jewish past took place, the Jewish present continues, and the Jewish future will continue forever and ever. And actually, by the way, it's also a symbol of coexistence in the Middle East. I always say, if you want to see coexistence, go to an Israeli hospital. My kids were born in an Israeli hospital and they have this custom in Israeli hospitals that all the babies get put in this baby room, right? They call it the Tinokia. So you have Arab baby next to Jewish baby, Muhammad next to Moshe, Miriam next to Mariam. Like, it's an incredible thing to see. It's also very noisy, but incredible thing to see. And when I was operated on several years ago, the last eyes I saw were the Arab and the Jewish doctor who were performing surgery on me. So this is really where coexistence exists. The street signs are in Hebrew, Arabic, and English. The Knesset rests on Friday for Muslims, on Saturday for Jews, on Sunday for Christians. It's amazing they get anything done. But this really is where the light is shining from the Middle East. One sole Jewish country that speaks to everything that exists within Judaism. And so that's definitely something we have to continue to stress so that people understand we're not some kind of foreign implant. We're not going anywhere. Am Yisrael Chai isn't just a motto, it's a promise.
Very, very well said, my friend. Very well said. I almost wish we could end there because it felt like such a perfect little final note. But you're 100% right. I mean, Israel is the picture of coexistence in a way that most of the West even isn't, right? Like they pretend, when they talk about Israel, they pretend that there's no racism or homophobia or bigotry in North America at all, right? That there's like a picture of... But Israel, you go and it's so beautiful to spend your day on Tel Aviv beach and then to walk into Jaffa for dinner and to see the Muslims walking to prayer, to hearing the call to prayer, seeing the mosques. I mean, Jaffa is like a beautifully, diverse city, and it really represents the rest of the country. And I think that it's really disappointing when I hear people call us, white colonizers, and to talk about apartheid and to not understand the extent to which Israel represents diversity. And I'll actually go a bit further to touch on what you said before. It doesn't just exist... Israel doesn't just exist because of our indigeneity to the land. It exists also because we weren't welcome anywhere else, And so when you talk about what's going on now is this reversal of trauma, to talk about us ethnically cleansing when we're trying to create this diverse state because we're ethnically cleansed from everywhere else. To talk about, anyways, I won't go off on that rant, but it's just something that really gets and sort of sticks with me.
Absolutely.
And the other thing, Michael, just because you made so many good points, I wanted to touch on. The other thing you said was that, this Palestinian state that Canada is calling for would be built, or would be the foundation would be on the blood of Israelis killed on October 7th. But I think the biggest challenge for the world to understand, to your point before, is that it's also being built on the blood of the Palestinians sacrificed by Hamas, by Iran, by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. These groups that said the citizens of Gaza are more valuable to us dead, in many cases. I know that's a bit of an aggressive statement, but they're more valuable to us in danger, at least, than they are, safe. And to me, that's something the world is failing to understand, that they've been used as pawns, effectively, that we don't want war with them, they don't want war with us, and we're stuck in the middle, and Hamas has to go as a result.
And one of the things we say in StandWithUs, education is the road to peace. So it starts with those building blocks of education. You have to, one of the things in the Abraham Accords that's been amazing is that the UAE has changed its curriculum, and they're teaching about Judaism, and they're teaching about the Holocaust. I mean, this is what has to happen. And when a society has been so poisoned, as unfortunately Palestinian society has been, by anti-Semitism that dehumanizes Jews, that leads somewhere. When the kids' programs and the classroom education and the TV shows, and you have sports facilities named after terrorists, and that has a drip effect on generations of people. So you have to de-radicalize that incitement before you can get to peace. You don't make peace with your enemies, you make peace with your former enemies. And they have to agree to be former enemies.
There's no, unfortunately, with the state of the education system in much of the Arab world, but specifically in Gaza, specifically the materials that are being funded by Canadians through UNRWA, are creating this strife, are creating this dichotomy between Israelis and Palestinians. So it's very well said. I asked you what the one thing you would like to change about the way Israel presents itself to the world is, and I was afraid you might say, well, we're a peaceful country, we want peace. But I think what you pointed out instead, which was really important, is that we want peace more than our adversaries. And that's important to understand, is that if we could just be left alone and we could just live and create a beautiful, diverse state and coexist with our neighbors, that would be our first choice, our second choice, and our 100th choice.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate
imagine
you
what
pointing that
Israel
out.
could do if it didn't have to spend as much money as it does on defense, right? Can you only imagine what this region would look like and what gifts it would give to the world?
We could do a whole podcast on the way that Israel has contributed to society and to the rest of the world, and it's unfortunate that people don't see it that way, especially when they talk about boycott, divest, and sanction. They don't understand how much of what they use day to day and how much is being used to save people, with medical conditions and all sorts of other things around the world. They'd be boycotting it. It's sad. It really is. But I know we're running out of time, Michael. So I want to just ask you a couple quick questions. And this one's a bit more hard hitting. Like, we talked about what Israel could be doing differently or how it could be represented differently. But I'm wondering if there's one thing that people are missing about the war. Right now, this war has been going on for close to 2 years. People said that it was disproportionate on, October 20th. They were accusing Israel of going too far. 2023, obviously. You and I both know that's not the case. You and I both know Israel has very specific military goals it's trying to achieve that are critical to not just Israeli safety, but that of the Palestinian people as well. But what is the one thing about Israel's war in Gaza that you think is most misunderstood, most misrepresented on the world stage?
Wow. Well, I think it really comes down to the fact that it is a just war. Israel is trying to fight an enemy in the most humane way, but trying to get rid of Hamas. And Hamas perpetrated the worst massacre on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And we're still learning horrific new details of what they did. And of course, they had the best part of 2 decades to rule Gaza, and instead they took all the billions that they were given and built down into tunnels and invested in terror apparatus and so on and so forth. And so this is a war unlike any other, and no nation on earth has fought a war like this in a civilian area by choice from Hamas. They fight out of uniform, they hide behind civilians, and with a view to trying to protect civilian life while taking out Hamas terrorists and Hamas terrorist infrastructure. And at times Israel has been held back. It was held back from going into Rafah. It was held back from going to Gaza City. More recently, we killed some very senior Hamas operatives, including the kidnappers of people like Emily Damari, who were in Gaza City. Well, previously we weren't going in there because we were being told not to. And so this is a really tough situation. Israel doesn't want to be there. We did not want to lose over 900 brave, incredible young people, our soldiers. But of course we understand that we cannot allow this situation to happen again. And if we can have a conclusive victory against Hamas, the region will be better placed, not just for the Jewish residents of Israel, but for all of the residents of Israel, for Palestinians as well, and for the broader region. We've seen some incredible things happen in the past 2 years. Hezbollah being largely defanged, Iran certainly having an incredible campaign that Israel fought against Iran, and a necessary one, against its ballistic missiles, which can do huge damage as much as their nuclear arms. And this final battle against Hamas and its compatriots, the Houthis and others, has to take place and has to be won. So this is a just war. Israel doesn't fight a war because it wants to. It understands the sacrifice of war. Believe me, my own son is in the army. My daughter has served as an officer. And that's the case of pretty much every Israeli you can find. So we understand what it takes. We understand what's at stake. But as I mentioned before, that promise of Am Yisrael Chai, we have to be able to defend it. We have to be able to defend our lives. And that's really what's going on right now.
Yeah, because I think for a lot of Jewish people, at least here outside of Israel, it feels like, it's not just about, a promise to the land or, a connection to our indigenous home, but it's really, it's existential. It's existential
Sure.
for us to have the state of Israel, to know that there's a place that we can call home that will defend us in our most dire moments. And I think, like we've talked about, there's a lot of fear around the Jewish community right now, which, is rightfully so. And so, like I said, I know you have to run. And I know that Israelis, it's not even like you talk to people and you'll say to them, how have things changed for you since October 7th? What are you doing differently with your job, with your whatever it might be? And most times the answer is we're still in October 7th. There's no post October 7th yet. We're not post trauma. We're in the trauma. And I'm sure, like you said, people have their kids that are going out to war and serving in the IDF, and it takes a wild amount of courage. And so I guess I'd love to end off like I always try to, with a bit of hope and encouragement. What is it really? I mean, outside of, like we talked about, Am Yisrael Chai, but what is it, whether it's through your job at Stand With Us or through your family, what gives you that hope, that desire to push on?
So many things. I mean, I see the young people who are standing up on campus there, and your team, Jesse, doing an incredible job in high school and campus and reaching out to the community and empowering them to do so bravely and proudly and confidently, and how many non-Jewish allies you guys reach as well. So I see that. And here in Israel, I see how Israelis have reacted to the war, and they've rallied behind each other, and they've supported each other. On October the 8th, they were, baking and cooking for each other and supporting families less advantaged, whether it was in the north or the south, whoever was most affected at the time. We've come together as a community here in Israel and in the diaspora. And so when our back was against the wall, we really came through. We showed our resilience, we showed our pride, and we showed our strength. at this incredibly tough time, and we continue to do so. So I'm inspired every day.
You're 100% right. Like I sort of touched on earlier, it's the ability to come together as a community that has sustained us for all these years. And I think that there are moments where people feel the fracture, where some people feel one way about the war and others about feel another way. And I think for us, the beautiful thing at Stand With Us is that we don't need to engage necessarily in those politics, in those questions about government or decision or policies. We're just deeply, firmly rooted in our belief that Israel has a right to not just to exist, not just to defend itself, but to thrive like any other nation would around the world, and to be true to that. And I think that's been a big part of what's kept our students going, is not feeling like they need to get up and to defend every Israeli policy decision and talk about things they might not know, but just to be able to say simply that we should be able to live without rockets being shot at us, without our fences being torn down and atrocities being committed. There's one thing that unites us, and I think it's in our desire for peace and our desire for safety. That's the one thing that the entire Jewish community can agree on, which is funny because we always say, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. But Michael, I can speak for my whole team here when I say there's a lot of pride that we have to, work in an organization like Stand With Us, and to have the opportunity to, be led by folks like you and Roz, Jerry, and Esther, and the incredible people leading the charge here, because we really believe in what we do. And it's been special to see the world sort of start to follow suit. And I know as things get tough, it's easy to shell away, but I know I speak for you too when I say we'll keep pushing forward, we'll keep making our voice heard. And I appreciate you joining us today to make your voice heard.
Absolutely. Keep it up, and with the incredible work that you guys are doing over there. And we welcome all Canadians to the Stand With Us Centre in Jerusalem in King David Street. We love hosting Canadians. They're our politest audience. So send more over. We're happy to see them.
Reach out to us if you'd ever like to visit the Stand With Us Education Center while you're in Jerusalem. Just reach out, give us a call, DM us on Instagram, whatever it might be. We would love to set you up while you're there, because it's really fantastic, and I think gives you a true taste of our impact around the globe. Michael, thank you so much for your time. We'll look forward to seeing you on your next visit west, or our next visit to Israel. But for now, thanks for joining us virtually, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Jesse.
All right, Michael, be well.